Hello everyone and welcome to the Tank Club. Today we're going to do a review of all the mythic items in the Elder Scrolls Online, and we're going to talk about what the best ones are for tanking. We're going to have a look at some kind of niche ones as well that you might want to use in some situations potentially, and kind of just go over the positives, the negatives, and whether it's worth grinding these out and farming these so you can use them on your tank build. Okay, so we're just going to go down the list of all the mythic items, starting with Belhaz's Band, and this one is not really useful for tanks, so it's going to improve your light attack damage, so it's not something you'd use for a tank. Next we've got Bloodlord's Embrace, and this would slot into the kind of self-sustain mythic item, and this is quite a popular one with newer players. And the way this works, dealing damage with a bash attack places a persistent uncleansable blood curse on an enemy. You can only have one blood curse enemy at a time. Dealing additional bash damage moves the blood curse, and when you block, a blood cursed enemy restores 1605 magicka to you. This effect can occur once every 1 second. Now, I have done videos on this in the past, so you should go and watch them if you want a bit more detail, but I personally don't think it's worth using this in most situations because you're not going to get hit every 1 second. You can only apply this to one enemy at a time. Bosses in this game generally don't hit more than once every 4, 5, 6 seconds. Some bosses won't even hit you for longer than that. So if you consider something like St. Olms in Asylum Sanctorium, you could be waiting 20 seconds to get hit, at which point this isn't doing anything. You don't really want to be using a mythic item that is basically inactive for large portions of time. So 1605 magicka restored every 1 second sounds fantastic, but in reality, it's not going to proc that often. In an ad pull, you'll apply it to an enemy, it might hit you one time and then it'll be dead. So it's largely ineffective. Now, I have seen some people like to use this because some people might use this with the double Froststaff build, and they might be using the Tri-Focus passive, which means your magicka gets turned off, your magicka recovery, at which point this is one of your main ways to restore magicka back. So I can kind of see why people do use it, but I don't think it's really that good just because it's largely inactive. That's the way that I view it. If it's not applied to the enemy and they're not hitting you, then it's inactive. And there's some places where bosses actually can't have this applied to them. So in Cloud Rest, if you apply this to the Shade of Zamarja in the portal, it doesn't apply to that kind of enemy. So there are situations where it doesn't really work. The next one we've got is Death Dealer's Fate, and this one, you could kind of use this. It's not a terrible one, so you gain a persistent stack of Escalating Fate every 2 seconds that you are in combat, up to 30 stacks max. Each stack of Escalating Fate increases your maximum stamina, health, and magicka by 88. You lose a stack of Escalating Fate every 4 seconds you are out of combat. So if you're trying to stack ridiculously high max stats, then this works. Now, I have used this a few patches ago when we were first progressing Rockgrove. There wasn't as many useful monster sets at that particular time. Obviously, since then, we've gained more monster sets. So I was using this mythic item because I just wanted something that was useful on my build, and having those really high max stats was quite helpful. Obviously, nowadays, you might not really find this as useful. There's monster sets that are much more useful now, and there are other mythic items that are going to be more useful. So in those same situations where I used it in the past, I probably wouldn't use it now. But if you are somebody who wants to stack those really super high max stats, then it could be something that you can consider. So by using this, I was able to get 50k max health, 40k stamina, 30k magicka. It does give you a lot of max stats, but generally this is more of a selfish thing, and so it wouldn't really be used, especially nowadays with us having so many useful monster sets. Okay, next we've got the Dovra Sabatons. While sprinting, you gain a stack of Draconic Scales, granting you armor up to 20 stacks max. Upon stopping, you deal physical damage. So this isn't really something that is going to be useful because you have to be sprinting to get the use out of it. There isn't really many places where you're going to be sprinting, stopping, benefiting from the armor, doing the damage. It's not something that's really worth using. And this is another one. So if you continuously sprint for 1 second, you gain the ability to pass through enemies. We did some testing of this on the PTS before it came out, and it didn't work as I thought it was going to work. I did think potentially this could be quite useful. So you continually sprint for 1 second, you gained the ability to pass through enemies. So you can just run straight through enemies. And they become charmed for 4 seconds, removing their ability to attack or cast abilities as they move towards you. Charming an enemy this way restores stamina and magicka. So I was thinking about this for ad pulls in potential situations where you can kind of sprint through them. You might be able to stack them up with Void Bash. They attack you automatically, but the 4 seconds end so fast that it just didn't work how I was imagining it. So I don't think this is worth grinding out to get this, because it just 4 seconds isn't long enough. Okay, the Gaze of Sithis. So you get increased max health, increased health recovery, you get armor, and it reduces your block mitigation to 0. So if you're in combat with an enemy and you block, it's basically the same as not blocking. So you essentially don't have the ability to block anymore. I've done a video of this before where I went into Asylum Sanctorium, I got hit by the light attack from St. Om's. The light attack killed me in one shot because I have 0 block mitigation. So this is not good for a tank. This is more of a PvP related thing. I know people, you can use, I mean, there's people who have used this for tanking, but was it worthwhile? Not really, because it just doesn't do anything beneficial for you. Increased max health and health recovery. 4,000 armor is a lot. You can gain like the armor cap without using this. You can get 40k health plus without using this. You don't really need to use it. It's not really providing any benefit. And the fact that you have 0 block mitigation means you're going to have to roll dodge every single heavy mechanic and heavy attack. And sometimes that just isn't possible. Sometimes when there's a channel attack, it's going to hit you whether you roll dodge or not. So generally, wouldn't be worth it. Harpooner's Wading Kilt. Obviously, this is more for a damage dealer. Not something that I would particularly use. Left-hander's Aegis Belt. Roll dodge no longer evades attacks, but instead grants a damage shield that absorbs up to 20,990 damage over 1 second. This damage shield is unaffected by battle spirit. You're not really going to be roll dodging consistently to benefit from this. So you roll dodge, you're still going to take damage because you no longer evade damage. That's the whole point of roll dodging as a tank. Sometimes you're doing it to evade damage. So for me personally, if I take a big hit for some reason, maybe the healer's down, I do like an emergency roll dodge to evade the damage for a few seconds so I can kind of get my bearings, heal myself up, and then carry on. By using this, I'd get like a 21,000 damage shield basically that lasts for 1 second. So it's going to be a very niche situation where you'd use this. I just think it'd be more beneficial in PvP than anywhere else when you're taking lots of hits and roll dodging and stuff. It's not really going to be that useful for tanking. Malakarth's Band of Brutality. Again, increase your damage. Done. Not something you're generally going to use as a tank. Marking Ring of Majesty. Again, it's not very useful. Increasing your weapon damage, increases your armor. For every set you're wearing at least 3 pieces or more of. So, yeah, not really something that's worthwhile. As you can see here, the benefits I'm basically getting just the standard current bonus, 100 weapon and spell damage, 1,157 armor. So, not really that great. I wouldn't want to use this. Mora's Whispers. You gain critical chance, increased stuff. That is, again, not something you're going to use for tanking. Oaken Soul Ring. So this came in this year with the High Isle patch. I absolutely love using this. I use this when I am doing overland content with my tank build, which I very frequently like to do. I play as a tank and I only enjoy playing as a tank. I like to do everything as a tank. I like to try and push the boundaries of tanking, and so I love using this particular ring. Now, there are some builds that I have created in the past, some 1-bar tank builds, and this obviously functioned well within those builds. It's not something you're going to use generally, but if you want to be doing some like overland damage, if you want to be doing some 1-bar builds, then you can consider this because it does offer you a few good things. So, while equipped, you are unable to swap between primary and back weapon sets. You gain Minor Berserk, Minor Courage, Major Brutality, Major Sorcery, Prophecy, Savagery, Minor Force, Minor Protection, Resolve, Mending, Fortitude, Endurance, Heroism, and Slayer. And Minor Aegis, and Empower. So you gain literally every minor buff and a few major buffs in there. So what it means is, if you are going to use a 1-bar tank build, I know there's people out there that might be suffering with various like issues that prevent them from playing a 2-bar build effectively. Something where you need to kind of slow the pace down of your tank build for whatever reason, then this is going to be great because it's just offering you so many different benefits, and it also means that you don't need to slot as many skills. You don't need to slot a skill that provides you with major resolve or minor protection and things like that because you've already got those buffs. So it means that when you are running a 1-bar tank build, you can just run essential skills because you're already maintaining a load of buffs from this particular thing. So this is really, really good for those situations. And like I say, if you want to do that overland damage, give this a go. The Pearls of Nafe. Now this for me is a group utility mythic item. Typically it would be used by a healer because it's difficult to find the space to use this, but there is like situations where you can use this for a tank and it is very, very strong. So when you use resources to cast a healing ability while in combat and your dominant resource is under 30%, you gain 5 ultimate. So this is really, really strong. It does require a lot of micromanagement, so it's not going to be for everybody, but it is a strong option for ulti gain because you can kind of spam cast this. There is no cooldown. So you can gain that 5 ultimate constantly by casting a skill every second. Obviously, it's quite resource intensive and it requires a lot of micromanagement. And it does require a certain situation where you're not required to wear a certain monster set. You're not required to wear another mythic item. And maybe even situations where you're potentially out of group, this is going to be more beneficial because you might not have a monster set that's able to be cast that benefits your group. Or like as an off tank. Like I can see this being useful in those situations. But it is going to be quite niche in the sense that not everyone's going to be able to maintain it or do a good job of using it. And also it does have that heavily situation of micromanagement. So if you're not actually bringing down your resources and then casting a healing ability while in combat, then it's not doing anything. It's not worth wearing this if you're not able to micromanage it well, because it's going to be just sitting there doing nothing. Any kind of gear set or any kind of skill that doesn't do anything because it's inactive for large portions of time isn't worth using. You're better off using something that's more active more of the time. But if you are a player that is able to benefit from this, then it could be a really, really good option. Next we've got Ring of the Pale Order. This restores 20% of your damage you deal as health. This value is decreased by 4% per ally that you're grouped with. You cannot be healed by anyone but yourself. I prefer to use the Oaken Soul Ring personally over this. If you wanted to use this for like your overland content instead of Oaken Soul, because maybe you want to run a 2-bar build, then this would be really nice because it means you don't necessarily have to use a healing skill. So even as a tank, I've done like Veteran Maelstrom Arena and things like that by using this quite a while ago now. Like I say, I would much prefer Oaken Soul nowadays, but if you wanted something that's going to heal when you're doing attacks, if you also combine this with your blue CP that also gives health back when you attack, then you can get a decent amount of healing back, but yeah, personally, it's not something that I like to use anymore. The Ring of the Wild Hunt, so increases your movement speed by 15% while in combat, and increases your movement speed by 45% while out of combat. So this is a pretty good mythic item for ad pulls as a tank. As a tank, you usually wear 5 heavy armor. Some people obviously wear more than that, and that will slow you down. By using this mythic item, obviously you're increasing your speed. The 15% while in combat is decent. The 45% while out of combat is really, really good. And obviously you've also got green CP that increases your movement speed while out of combat. So obviously, as a tank, you're expected to be ahead of your group. You're supposed to be the one leading into fights, especially for trial content. This is where you might necessarily use this because you want to be ahead of the group. You want to be stacking enemies. You want to be pulling things in. You want to be there before the damage dealers and the healers are there. You don't want to be behind the group. You want to be in front of them so that you're getting into combat first so you can start the aggro process. You can start taunting. You can start stacking. By using this, obviously, that helps you maintain that speed ahead of your group, and it also means you can kind of do the job that you need to do. You can combine this with a number of other things like speed boosts, speed boost skills, but you do have to remember there is a sprint speed, there is a movement speed cap. So if you're kind of over the cap of the movement speed, then obviously this isn't going to be that beneficial. If you're using 3 swift gear and then using speed boosts and speed CP, like you're already getting there, but maybe you don't need to use the swift jewelry. Like maybe you don't have the transmute crystals to craft swift jewelry, so you can potentially just use this instead, because you could use this instead of the swift jewelry and then you're going to get a really, really nice speed boost. And yeah, so that's when I would use this. Sea Serpent's Coil. While at full health, you gain 40% damage reduction. After taking damage while at full health, in combat, you gain Serpent's Rebuke for 10 seconds, snaring yourself by 40% and gaining Major Berserk and Major Courage, increasing your damage. So the damage reduction isn't really that worthwhile. So you reduce damage by 40% while at full health. Now, as a tank, if you stack resistances and you've got skills running, you should have quite a few good different buffs and debuffs on the enemy. You're not going to really need the 40% damage reduction, and it's only while you're at full health. So it's not worth having a 40% snare and reducing your damage by 40% to then gain a damage buff. Personally, I just don't think it is really that worthwhile. Shapeshifters Chain reduces the cost of your transformation, ultimate, and werewolf abilities by 15%. So if you're playing as a werewolf tank, this is potentially useful, because if you wanted to kind of, maybe you're not using a monster set, maybe you don't want to use, you need a bit of sustain help, this is going to really be quite helpful there, because it's reducing the cost of the transformation ultimate, not that useful, but reducing the cost of your werewolf ability by 15% is huge, because they're all stamina costing. And while you're transformed, increases your max stats as well, which is a nice little bonus on top of that. By increasing your max health, the werewolf heal is going to be much bigger. The stamina being higher is going to be good as well, because obviously you've got a lot of stamina skills. So this is actually quite useful if you want to play as a werewolf tank. I personally don't use this mythic, I use a different one. But it is something you can use if you wanted to help with your own sustain. It really depends how you perform as a tank as a werewolf. Snow Treaders, while you are in combat, you're immune to snares and immobilizations that can be cleansed, but you cannot sprint. So, I mean, there are really, really niche situations where this might help a new player. One of the things that kind of springs to mind off the top of my head is the triplets in VHOF. So sometimes there's like the claws on the floor. As a newer player, people might be running into them. As a tank, when you're trying to do the boss switch, obviously you can just walk around them and you can just not walk through the claws. But I can see where potentially like that might be a place where people might do that, and so this would be useful. But like I say, very, very niche. It's not really worth grinding it out for that. But if you really wanted to, you could use it for those really niche situations. If you are somebody who's struggling because you're getting snared and immobilized for whatever reason in whatever piece of content you're doing, then obviously you could bring these in if it's causing you to die and it's causing you severe problems. Otherwise, it's really not worth using these. Next, we've got the Spulder of Ruin. Now, this is probably one of the best tank mythic items, just because it's providing a really, really nice group buff with absolutely zero effort. Activating Crouch activates and deactivates a 12-meter Aura of Pride. So you just crouch, you don't have to stay crouched, you crouch and it turns it on. When you crouch again, it turns it off. And up to 6 allies in the aura gain 260 weapon and spell damage. Reduces your health, magic and stamina recovery by 70 for every ally benefiting from your Aura of Pride. Now 12 meters is a pretty big area, so this is typically used by off-tanks in trials and sometimes healers, because it is such a huge buff. 260 weapon and spell damage is obviously more than minor courage, which you would get from the Claw of Yolnahkrin set and things like that, and it's just so easy to maintain. So in a dungeon group, very, very good, because you can just turn it on, your group stand inside the circle, they're benefiting from it, and the loss of the recovery in a dungeon situation is really easy to overcome. You just use a Baron Thirsk or a Magma Incarnate. In a trial situation, as an off-tank, like main tanks generally wouldn't use this, because in trials the groups are usually much more further back from bosses, in depending on the fight obviously, but in most situations the off-tank would be the person who's more in the group than the main tank. So off-tanks would use this most likely, and when you've got a loss of recovery, you'd obviously again use the Baron Thirsk or the Magma Incarnate, but it's going to be much more severe, because in a dungeon group you've only got 3 people that are benefiting from this, so 70 times 3. Whereas when you've got 6 people benefiting from it, that works out at quite a lot of lost resources. So you do have a bigger issue. You do want to try and stack your resources higher in other ways when you are using this as the off-tank. But this is very, very good. Like I say, it's automatic. You turn it on and you stand there and everyone's benefiting. That is the plus side of it. Obviously, you are losing magic recovery, which is not good. But if you're using different foods, switch your food, stack your resources, change your traits and your gear and things like that, you're able to benefit your whole group with very little impact to yourself. And like I say, it's such a huge group buff, it's definitely worth using. Right, Stormweavers. Sprint, roll dodge, bash, break free, sneak and block now consume magicka instead of stamina. You reduce your magicka recovery to 0 while blocking, sneaking or sprinting. You no longer reduce your stamina recovery to 0 while blocking, sneaking or sprinting. I did test this out. I've tried to kind of make some use out of this, but I'm kind of struggling a little bit at the minute, because the idea of it, I understand the idea, seems kind of okay, in the way that you're basically switching your build from how a standard tank is now, switching it completely over to magicka. The only trouble is the way that obviously tanking works is we do all those things with stamina and then we use magicka skills. And it's mostly magicka skills that are useful on a tank. Now by using this, you've got to kind of flip your build the opposite way around. So if you are going to block, roll, dodge, sprint, bash, break free, sneak, all those kind of things with magicka, You need to start using stamina skills instead to be able to kind of flip it the opposite way around. Now, there's not enough good stamina skills to use to make this worthwhile. That is the only trouble. And it would mean that you would have to stack your magicka higher than your stamina. You'd have to have a higher magicka bar and all that kind of stuff. It's just very, very difficult because, like I say, most of your skills as a tank are magicka based. So it's not just sprint, roll, dodge, bash, break free, sneak and block that consume magicka. It's also most of your tank skills. So that does make it extremely difficult to make this work. If you really wanted to, you could kind of figure out some kind of double ice staff build that might function with this. I'm personally not going to use it though because it just doesn't make sense, like I say. With all the skills that use magicka as well, it just makes it impossible to really sustain it. Sorobains Ward, you cannot move while bracing. While bracing, you create a 12-meter zone of protection. Allies within the zone increase their block mitigation by 30% and health recovery by 950. The only trouble with this is the fact that it's block mitigation. So people have to physically be blocking to benefit from that 30% mitigation. It's not just general mitigation, it's not damage reduction. If it had been damage reduction, I could have seen places where this would be useful. You know, like when you're in a progression group, people are dying, you could stand there and you could hold block and give your group like damage reduction. That would have been somewhat useful. But in the way that it is, you've got a block, and then everyone else has also got a block. And typically, I don't really know many places where your group all have to block, and then people die. There's like almost nowhere that when your like group are blocking a damage mechanic that people are dying. So I don't really see the use of it. I can see, like, if you've got people in Locust's hard mode in Sunspire, and people die there, usually it's because people are overlapping and making mistakes. But obviously if people are blocking there when the beam comes through, obviously if you had this as well, the extra 30% block mitigation is going to reduce people's incoming damage further. But it's just, because the group don't like fully stack up, you have to separate the group, you'd have to run two of them. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But yeah, like, because it's block mitigation, I just can't really see where this would be that useful, because when people are blocking damage, that usually prevents them from dying from any mechanics where block is required anyway. So having an additional 30% block mitigation on top of that doesn't seem like it's really going to make that much difference for PvE content. Thracian Stranglers, this increases damage, so again, it's something you could use if you wanted to. I know some people like to use this for like overland tanking and solo tank situations, but I much prefer the Oaken Soul Ring. And finally, we've got the Talk of Tonal Constancy. This is a self-sustain set, another one. While your stamina is less than 50%, increases your magicka recovery, and while your magicka is less than 50%, increases your stamina recovery by 450. So, I mean, really, the only place that this is kind of worth using, let's say you're using a build, front bar, sword and board, back bar, ice staff, and you're using the Trifocus passive. What you could do then is, when your kind of resources are low on one bar, switch to the other bar. That would make the recovery come on for that side, and then you'd switch bar again, and then your other recovery is back on. So, like, if for a sustain set, I'd much rather use something like the Engine Guardian monster set, or I wouldn't really use this, but I can see where like some beginner players might benefit from those recoveries if they're able to play their build in a certain way, where when they bar swap, they're gonna be blocking with magicka, and then they're gonna bar swap, they're gonna be blocking with stamina, and like this is activating the alternative recovery each time. So it is gonna like improve sustain of your recovery, but 450 recovery, while it seems like a good amount, like generally your stamina recovery is quite low, so you are gonna have to go onto your other bar. You're gonna end up spending the majority of your time just bar swapping, blocking with that resource, bar swapping, blocking with the other resource, and it's gonna be largely ineffective, I think, in how that would work. So if you really wanted to push your recoveries higher to try and improve your sustain, you could give this a try with the Trifocus passive on an ice staff. Otherwise, it's not really worth it. There's other better monster sets, there's other better mythics than this one, but it's something you could use if you really wanted to. So just to kind of quickly recap, obviously the most useful mythic items that you're going to find are anything that provides group utility. So the Pearls of El Nafe, the Spulder of Ruin, and the Ring of the Wild Hunt I would class as like the three most important mythics, because they provide some benefit to your group. Increased damage, increased ultimate gain, increased speed. They're all things that are very, very useful for group content in helping you to kind of perform your role as a tank. Obviously the self-sustain ones, Bloodlord's Embrace, Death Dealer's Fate, Stormweaver's Talk of Tonal and the Shapeshifters Chain, very niche, not as useful as the group utility ones, but they're things that you can take away and look at if you really wanted to. And then obviously the other ones, Oaken Soul, Ring of the Pale Order, Snow Treaders, that kind of thing. Those are some mythics that you can look at, and it depends again on the situation. If you're doing overland content, if you want to do some damage and things like that, take a look at those. If you want to see more information about the mythic items, make sure you check out the tankclub.com. We do have a mythic item page that gives you information on how to pick these up, where all the pieces are, how to collect them, and where it might be good to use them. So make sure you check that out as well. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.